Good morning and welcome to the Family Meeting Podcast. Glad that you are with us today. I hope you have had a great week. I know we have. We've been getting ready for Christmas. Everybody's in the Christmas spirit around here in our house. We got our Christmas tree up. Hopefully you've got yours up and ready to go. It's always one of my favorite times of year when we put our tree up together.
And we got to get ugly sweaters. Christmas sweaters.
I'm covered. You're covered. It's the girls. We got to get them some ugly Christmas sweaters because that's what we have going on at our church.
Yeah, ugly Christmas sweater Sunday, and we're going to do like Christmas cookie exchange and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
To go along with our Christmas at the Movies series.
Yeah, we are like in full Christmas gear.
Yeah.
Which is my favorite. I love Christmas. It's my favorite holiday, and here's why. Because even people who don't know Jesus and people who are not followers of Jesus are in like a chipper, happy, jolly mood, typically.
Yep, holly jolly.
At this time of year. Even people who are cranky
like me
get a little happy around Christmas.
Like me.
You just can't help it. Yeah, even you.
A little happier.
So that's why I love Christmas. Hopefully you're enjoying yours too. Unfortunately, today we do have a difficult topic to continue from last week, and that is sexual abuse. So today we're going to get down into some more specifics on things to watch for and ways to protect your children and how to deal with the repercussions of sexual abuse if it's been present in your life or your children's.
Great. And so one of the things, just as we're recording and you're introducing, don't forget to let them know this is part 2.
Oh, right. Yep. Got it. Okay. Thanks
all
for
right.
reminding.
Yeah, we'll have that in all the description and everything, but just if somebody pops it on or whatever, I want them to know that's part 2.
Got it.
All right. Are we ready?
I'm ready. You guys ready?
Ready?
Yeah, they're ready.
Gather round, everybody. It's time for a family meeting. The Family Meeting's a show that's all about family relationships. We're the Osterkamps. I'm Thomas. This is my wife, Lysandra.
Hello, and welcome to our family. Welcome to episode 168 of the Family Meeting Podcast. On today's episode, we are looking into part 2 of a very difficult topic that we started last week.
Yeah, protecting your children from sexual abuse.
Right. And we started this discussion last week, but unfortunately, there's just so much information that we wanted to share with you that we could not get it into one single episode. So today we're picking up where we left off last week. We are going to talk about preventing sexual abuse. We're going to talk about how to talk to your kids about sexual abuse. We also want to learn how to spot it. So like what happens in a child's life if it's happened to them? What are some signs that we can watch for? And if these things happen, then we can be like, okay, it's time to ask some questions because something's off.
Well, and on part 1, if you haven't listened to that yet, I would encourage you to go back and watch it because we talked a little bit about the steps that a predator would take to get into a child's life, to get access and all those sorts of things. We talked about the most likely places and situations where something's going to happen. So very important information for you to know so you can watch out for your own kids, but not just your kids, all the kids in your sphere of influence.
Right.
So whether that's your extended family, your church family, the kids who are in your neighborhood, just we need to know these things so that we are aware and paying attention.
That's right. We also talked about peer-to-peer abuse last week. And that is something that happens that I think a lot of times we aren't prepared for. It's kind of off our radar. So do go back and check that episode out. We're also going to talk this week about how to help your kids if, God forbid, it really has already happened to them, and how we can deal as adults with past sexual abuse, maybe if that's something from your past. And one thing that I wanted to mention to people is the statistics that we talked about last week. I just want to kind of remind all of us how prevalent this really truly is. Yeah. 1 in 4 girls will be sexually abused. 1 in 4, which, as Thomas mentioned last week, hits us pretty hard because we have 4 daughters. Yeah. And you think about that statistic, it's pretty scary. 1 in 6 boys will be abused. Yeah. Sexually abused, specifically sexually abused. So this is not something that is a non-issue. This is not something made up. This is not something that only happens in, low class, low income neighborhoods. It spans the spectrum of society.
Exactly. That means this has happened to you or this has happened to somebody you know.
Absolutely.
100% you or someone you know. This impacts your life.
It does. And we want to also cite our main source, and that is sexual awareness training videos through Ministry Safe by Kimberly and Gregory Norse. So they have put together a really great training series. I don't know what happened to my brain there. That you can use for your ministry if you want to train adults in preparation to work with children. But it was just good for us as parents. So we wanted to share this stuff with you.
So is this free? Can people go online and just watch the videos?
I'm not totally sure. And here's why. Because the links were sent to me because I was beginning to work in a new ministry. So that ministry sent it to me. I don't know if the ministry paid for it or if it's something they could go online and find for themselves.
Okay, gotcha. So what we'll do is we'll check that out, and if we're able to post the links in our Facebook community group, then we'll post that for those that may want to check out those videos and get a little bit more information.
Great. So
we want to just remind you that when protecting our children from sexual abuse, it's not often a stranger.
Right.
Now, that does happen, and I just remember as a kid how often we would talk about and hear about stranger danger.
Yeah.
Like, stranger danger, and then, now we are inviting all these strangers over to our house for absolutely everything, whether it's, like, ordering an Uber or delivery or food, like, all this kind of stuff, or selling stuff on Facebook Marketplace and other places. It's like you just have random strangers coming to your house all the time.
Yeah, you can get people's addresses, phone numbers, everything from things like Facebook Marketplace or whatever else you're selling on. And it's crazy. I mean, like, strangers have access to you and to me. But that's not really where the danger is coming from.
No, obviously there are snatch and grabs, and there are people that, go about it that way, that it is a stranger. But here's this statistic. 90% of children abused are abused by someone they know and know well. So most of the time it's coming from somebody you know. It's not a stranger.
Right.
And that's so fascinating because we spend so much time, like I mentioned, warning about strangers, and it's often, more often than not, 90% of the time, it's somebody you know. It is a coach, it is a teacher, camp worker, youth pastor, just different people who are in your life, quote unquote, uncle so-and-so, whoever, somebody's friend or whatever. And so you just kind of want to keep that in mind. And
right.
that's why we're sharing, hey, what is the predator's thought process? What are they trying to do? They're trying to build relationships with you, the gatekeeper, get you comfortable so they can gain access. And
I mean, this statistic makes sense to me because in both of our cases of sexual abuse, when we were younger, it was somebody that we knew well.
Yeah.
So it checks out for us. We also do a lot of counseling for people, and this will come out. And sure enough, it's people that they know very, very well. I have only one time encountered somebody who was sexually abused by a stranger.
Yeah.
And that was at a park. But let's talk about, things that kind of give us a false sense of safety. One thing that gives us a false sense of safety are background checks.
Yeah.
We feel like, oh man, they've got a background check. They're just probably good people.
Yeah. And we touched on this last time. Lysandra's going to give you a statistic about this in a second, but we mentioned it last time because there was this other statistic that talks about, hey, you've got, the first time people abuse somebody is when they're a teenager, but they're not prosecuted until some 20 years later or whatever. And so you've got this large window of time where, hey, nothing's being reported, nothing's happening.
Nothing's on their record.
And so you have somebody, well, hey, they've passed a background check. Well, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're not actively abusing children.
Really, the background checks are something that should be done
Yeah, most definitely. You should do them. Yeah.
But they are the least. That's like the least you can do.
Yes,
That's
definitely.
where you start when vetting people, right? So background checks are something that anybody who works anywhere near children in our ministries have to go through, which is great, but it is really the least protection that you can give. 10% or less of abusers will encounter the criminal justice system ever.
Wow, that's just crazy to me.
Ever. Yeah. So, I mean, that means that 90% of abusers have good background checks. They go through no problem.
Yeah.
Abusers look normal. They don't look like some creepy dude. You know,
Most of the time.
Yeah, that's true. Most of the time. So keep that in mind, because sometimes we think like, oh, this person is well dressed. They're very neat and tidy. They look clean and safe. But the truth is that doesn't mean anything.
Yeah.
They look like normal people, and you can't just spot them. Okay. 90% of convicted abusers are men, but remember that 10% of convicted abusers are women.
That's always surprising to me.
Me too. I can't even wrap my head around it.
It's just surprising me when there's a woman involved, but
Yeah.
but it does happen.
Yeah, it's much more rare, but it's something to think about. Protecting our children, though, can start by understanding signs of abuse. So you might not be able to just look at somebody and be like, oh, I can tell they are a sexual abuser. But there's going to be some signs that we're going to kind of talk to you about that may help you to identify if something's happening to your child. Knowing what may be a sign, that something's going on may show us that we need to start asking some questions, some open-ended questions that can help. And we are going to talk about what kind of questions you need to ask. But first, let's talk about signs of abuse in the victim.
Yes. And one of the things we talked about last time in part 1 is if you are just an active, involved parent who's paying attention, you can do away with most of the chances of your child being abused. Just knowing what's going on, being around, paying attention, like not on your phone all the time, like just aware. Okay. But the world we live in, we know the statistics, it happens. It happens. So paying attention to these signs.
And they're called predators for a reason.
Yeah.
They are predators. They're like actively trying to gain access to children. Like it's something that they're thinking about, they're scheming, they're planning. So it's not like we can just, it's going to be fine probably.
Yeah.
You know?
So here's some short-term impacts. Okay. So obviously you're going to see some changes involved in the way that your child behaves. So some of the short-term impacts are poor self-care. So you've got a child that all of a sudden stops really taking care of themselves, their personal hygiene and all this stuff. And whether they're actively thinking about it or it's just a subconscious thing, the idea behind it is I want to make myself less attractive to whoever it is. And so they're not taking care of themselves. Bedwetting. You've got a child that hasn't wet the bed for how long, and all of a sudden now they're wetting the bed. Maybe it's a weight change, whether that's a gain or a loss, depending on what's taking place. Fears or phobias that are just popping up out of nowhere. Like, they never used to be afraid of this, but all of a sudden now they're really freaked out about this situation or whatever else.
It's a child who no longer feels safe.
Yes, exactly. And you think about that because most of the time it's somebody they know, somebody they trust, so somebody they thought was safe. And so now they have all these questions about the world where, hey, I thought this was safe and now it's no longer safe. So
what else
is not safe? Exactly. Maybe night terrors, because obviously they're reliving some of these things in their hearts and in their minds. Cutting and self-mutilation is part of this. So if you notice that this starts to take place, obviously there's other reasons why they would start those behaviors. but this could be a sign that something like that's taking place. I know for me, that was something that I did. And it was, part of it was just kind of distracting myself from the thoughts of what was happening. And so that was something that I could control about the situation. Maybe it's disinterest in a person or activities they used to enjoy. So if all of a sudden now they don't enjoy things they used to enjoy, there may be a reason for that. And that maybe something's going on that is associated with that. Used to love volleyball. And now for whatever reason, she doesn't like volleyball anymore. She doesn't want to be on the team. She doesn't want to practice. She doesn't want to play the game at all. She doesn't want to watch it. Something could be going on in that arena.
And that's why awareness is so important, because when you first hear that, as a good parent, you think, I have to teach my child not to be a quitter. We make a commitment. We follow through. Like all of the character traits that we're trying to build in our children can make us completely miss what's actually happening. So rather than just saying, you don't have a choice, you're going to stay on the team and you're going to fulfill your commitment, maybe it's time to ask questions instead, because now you're aware that something may be going on.
Yeah, and so they don't enjoy those things anymore. Difficulty walking or sitting, and I don't need to get too graphic about that. You can just kind of use your own mind and understand why that could start to become an issue. Itching in the private areas, startled response to touch, so like, hey, didn't used to react that way. You put your hand on his shoulder, and all of a sudden he has a visceral reaction when he didn't before. Maybe it's sexual play with toys or other things that's just not appropriate for their age or how they have behaved in the past. Explicit drawings that once again are not age appropriate. So when you start to see these signs, okay, something may be going on there. Mm-hmm. Now you have certain things that are going to happen, like where you've got little boys drawing girls, right? And
right.
There's like some of that stuff is like age appropriate, but we're talking about things that absolutely just are not age appropriate.
You brought back a memory. So I was homeschooled, but we had like a group meeting that we would go to once a month. And I remember these little boys, and they were like, come look at the chalkboard. I came to look at the chalkboard and they were drawing butts. It was basically two big butt cheeks. And it was nothing
wasn't sexual or whatever.
At all. They thought butts were funny, So just keep in mind that there is some normal childhood curiosity that is bound to happen. But we're talking about things that are not age appropriate, are not typical, and a big change for your own child.
Exactly. Now that's short. These are some short-term impacts. Lysandra, why don't you share some of the long-term effects with us?
All right. So something that can happen that can really last a long time after sexual abuse from children is depression. Depression is present.
And it took me so long to put two and two together, because I have known for some time that I've struggled with depression since I was a young teenager. And I never really put the two together before. And I firmly believe that my depression started with what happened to me when I was a young teenager. I believe that's where it all began, and it's still something I struggle with today. So this is a long-term effect that really has been an issue for me most of my life.
Mm-hmm. Suicidal thoughts and acts. So maybe they're thinking about it, or maybe they've tried. Eating disorders and attempting to regain control over their bodies. So they can't control what's happening to them or what has happened to them in this area of their body, but they can control what they eat. So it may be bulimia, it may be anorexia.
Could be overeating or whatever.
It could be binge eating, yeah. Substance abuse. And of course, this is a huge problem in our society today. And when you hear the statistics of sexual abuse, it's no wonder. You think about that, how much that could be connected. Self-medicating with alcohol. When they're in school, it could result in a 2-letter or more drop in academic grades. So seeing a huge drop in academic excellence, it can be that. And there again, it makes me think about the fact that like, if your kid is getting A's and all of a sudden they're getting C's, you're just going to be like, why aren't you
trying harder?
Yeah. What, you're not committed to this. You're not trying. You're not doing well anymore or whatever, when there could be something very seriously wrong in their life and we've completely missed it.
Yeah, and now they're having a hard time focusing on what they need to focus in on because their mind is racing to all these other things and situations.
Exactly. Promiscuity and seductive behaviors. This is something that I have witnessed through different counseling situations that I've been in. I remember one time when a mother came to me and said that their older teenage daughter, well, stepdaughter at the time, the older teenage stepdaughter was acting so sexualized.
Yeah.
And she said, I don't understand what's wrong with her. And I said, I'm going to make a recommendation to you that you just ask some questions about sexual abuse. There may be a history of sexual abuse there. And she asked the questions, and sure enough, there was a stepbrother in the other household sexually abusing her ongoing. And so that it all came out. But that was the reason that she had become so sexualized.
Yeah.
So think about that. If you see those kinds of signs in your children or even, your young adult. Losing their innocence. Unfortunately, venereal diseases are a long-term effect. Excessive modesty. Now, I had a friend who was sharing with me that in high school, she all of a sudden started dressing in like extra large sweatshirts when she was, her normal size would have been a small. But she would dress as large, with large clothing and lots of layered clothing. And her goal was to make herself undesirable so that people couldn't tell the shape of her body because she had suffered sexual abuse as a young teenager. So that's something, when that came out on this this awareness training, I immediately thought, absolutely, I know somebody that did that. Prostitution can be a long-term effect of sexual abuse. Now, just because somebody is sexually abused as a child does not mean that they're headed towards towards prostitution. It doesn't mean that that's the end of the road.
Right.
But listen to this statistic. 98% of male and female prostitutes were sexually abused as children. 98%.
Wow.
I mean, that's basically everyone who is in prostitution was sexually abused. Almost every single person. That means something.
Yeah, and you notice that victims often go one of two extremes. So either they will go to the extreme of doing everything that they can do to become as unattractive as possible, whether that's literally physically what they're doing with their body or how they dress, to the other extreme of just diving right into that because their view of sex has been so marred by the abuse. And so having an understanding of some of these short-term things and long-term things will help us to be able to recognize maybe in our own kids or in the people who are around us what's happening.
And I would say, don't be afraid. I mean, we're going into talking to your kids about sexual abuse, but I really would encourage you in the right setting, if it's someone who's very, very close to you, if you're in private, don't be afraid to say, can I just ask you a personal question and you can choose not to answer it?
Yeah.
Is there sexual abuse in your past? Because that can start that person on a road of recovery.
On healing, yeah.
Yeah, because I've seen this many times where people don't even know in the front of their mind, the forefront of their mind, that they have been sexually abused. Our minds block it so that we're protected. And if you're seeing any of these kinds of signs, like the long-term effects is what I'm really thinking of, is maybe an adult friend or a young adult child or whatever, and you see these things, don't be afraid to ask them, like, have you ever had sexual abuse happen to you? That may be the question that they need to hear to allow themselves to face it, which will help them in their healing.
Yeah. And so now it's about, okay, how do we talk to our kids about this? Because obviously this is a difficult subject to talk about. It's a sensitive subject. So what do we do? And really, no matter how old your child is, obviously we've talked about this all the time. You have to have a conversation with your child where they are, and we don't want to give too much information to a small child that they're not ready for. But the best way to start the conversation is to begin by using regular events to bring up inappropriate touch and talk and then teach and ask questions. So things like doctor's appointments. And I remember even when the girls were very small,
like 3 and 4,
and we would go to their doctor's appointments. Most of the time it was Lysandra, but would have the conversations about, okay, we're going to the doctor and this is what he's going to do when he checks you over, and this is okay in this environment. We talk about, listen, if you're not at the doctor's office, nobody should be touching you in this area. Nobody should be asking to see certain things on you. If it happens, just let me know. And so it was a way to have those conversations and give our daughters a basis of, okay, this is okay in this moment because of this doctor and the test and the things that they're doing.
And mommy's in the room.
Yes, mom's in the room. And mom's in the room, and mom's paying attention in the room. Of what the doctor is doing and all those sorts of things. But that way they can kind of know, okay, this is okay in this moment. Now, none of them liked it. None of them looked forward to going to the doctor when they knew that they would have to be checked and things. But at least there was that comfort of they'd know what to expect, and you can have a conversation about if it happens somewhere else, okay, that's not right, that's wrong, and we want to be able to help you with that.
And the thing that's good about using doctor's appointments is if you're following doctor's orders, then your child is going to the doctor at least once a year.
Yeah.
So at least annually, you are going to have this discussion. And these discussions aren't fun, so they're easy for us parents to put off.
Yeah.
And be like, oh yeah, I need to talk to them sometime. Oh, it's not the right time. Oh, it's not the right time. Oh, there's people around. And we can easily put these discussions off for years. But if you make it a habit that when they go to the doctor on the ride there or the ride back or however you want to do it, maybe in the waiting room when you're sitting in the doctor's office, in the private room when it's just you and your child, if you make it your habit that you're going to have this conversation, that means at least annually you are doing a check-in on your child to make sure that they're safe.
Yeah.
At least annually.
Exactly.
So that's good.
And you notice that she talked about annually. So it's not like, hey, we had this conversation when they were small. We never have the conversation again. The point is we're using these regular events in their life to have the conversation, to be in touch with each other, so to speak, and check up on them on an ongoing regular basis. Right.
And this also, because it's annually or more, you have an open line of communication about this topic. So this is a topic that you talk about regularly. So they're going to be more comfortable coming to you if they have to, because this is something that they're used to talking with you about in private. And so you've got those line of communications, they're open.
Yeah. So whether that's doctor's appointments, maybe you're going to go try on clothes in changing rooms for the places that still do that since COVID.
Right.
That's a place to have a conversation. Anywhere they're going to be changing, I mean, you have that conversation. Because remember, one of the places that it happens most often is wherever they're going to be changing clothes.
Yep.
So,
and I think about even like locker rooms and coaching situations and team situations where like everybody hops on the bus, they get to the locker room, everybody's got to change. This is an opportunity. The season is starting. So have the conversation as the season starts. You're going to be changing with all of your peers. There's going to be coaches near. Like, this is okay. This isn't okay. This is what you need to do. Pay attention for this, that kind of thing.
Yeah. So maybe it's, hey, it's time to purchase undergarments, which no kid loves doing that. But especially with their parents. But you have that, it's an opportunity to have that conversation once again. And so you're talking about what's appropriate, what's not appropriate, and all those sorts of things. You're having discussions about, okay, if something happens, what do we do about that? And then I'm also want to use that as a way to dispel any threats that someone might make against them. So one of the threats that is often made against children is, if you tell somebody, then I'll harm your family. So I'll harm your mom, your dad, your whoever. So I'm using these conversations to get ahead of that. So that, hey, if somebody ever tells you to keep a secret, or they're going to harm me, they're going to harm your mom or your sisters, hey, I just want you to know that there's nothing they can do to me. Mm-hmm. Like, I am here to protect you no matter what. Yep. And so you
don't have to protect me.
You're getting out in front of some threats that this person's going to make. And so even the kids know, if something happens, this is going to be a threat they might make. And so I just want you to know, you're going to be all right. I'm going to keep you safe. I will do whatever it takes.
Yep. And I will believe you.
And so having those conversations, using the everyday things, you don't have to bring it up out of the blue and make it weird.
I'm great at doing that, though. That's kind of my strong suit.
You are, yeah.
Bringing up uncomfortable conversations in awkward times.
When they're older, like our girls are teenagers now, and so we do bring up things in an uncomfortable way sometimes. But especially as they're younger and you're teaching them about this kind of stuff and just warning them, it's a great way to bring up those conversations. Remember, we're trying to find balance. Mm-hmm. Trying to find balance between our children totally unaware and being that overprotective parent that makes your children find fear around every corner. Mm-hmm. And it's a tough balance, but it's one we have to be committed to finding as parents.
All right, so let's take the next step in this journey. If your child or another child opens up to you about sexual abuse, what do you do? Okay, it's happened. They came to you. They're telling you. What do you do? I mean, the first thing I think that you experience internally is anger.
Yeah.
It's such anger that someone has done this. Someone has just brought this kind of trauma into your child or another child. And so I know for me, anger is the first response, but that is not something that you want to show, because that child can interpret that anger toward themselves and not the perpetrator. Yeah. So don't freak out. Okay.
Yeah.
I like to always say, don't panic is the first step to everything. Don't panic. You're going to listen. So don't interrupt. Don't talk over them. Let them completely share everything they're going to share. And you may have to wait, because they may be talking through tears or trying to organize their thoughts or get the courage to keep speaking. So be patient and listen. Then you're going to respond calmly.
Yeah.
Really calmly. Don't be overly emotional. If you are, they're not going to keep going and talking.
Exactly. What that'll do is that'll shut them down. So whether you explode in an outburst of anger or whatever else, that's going to shut them down. You know, if you just get overly emotional in that moment, it's going to shut them down. So you really just want to listen. Just calmly listen, sit quietly, be supportive of them, but sit quietly and just let them get the words out that they're trying to say.
Be sensitive to vague or partial disclosures. Most likely a child is not going to come up to you and be like, so-and-so did this, 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 and this. That's not how it's going to happen.
Right.
Remember that the number one reason that they don't tell is they believe no one's going to believe them. So they may test you before they really share everything.
Yes.
Most of the time they're going to come to you and it's going to be vague and it's going to be partial. They're going to float something past you to see how you react, because if you don't believe them, or if you laugh or you think it's a joke or whatever, that was the test and you failed, and they're not going to share. So pay attention to those vague and partial disclosures, because they may just be seeing how you're going to respond to that tiny bit of information.
Oh, and you got to remember, they're afraid. Mm-hmm. They're afraid because of what's happening to them. They're afraid to let it out, and afraid of what the outcome of telling is going to be. And so, like Lysandra said, most of the time, they're not just going to come right out and say, this is what's happening. It's going to be maybe just a little hint of what's actually happening. And so your response in that moment is absolutely huge.
Mm-hmm. Okay, then you're going to ask open-ended questions. And here's some examples. Do you want to tell me something else? Or what happened next? Not yes or no questions, because you're not going to lead the conversation. You're going to let them tell you. You don't want to put ideas or scenarios in their head or anything like that.
Right.
Also, don't ask any leading or assuming questions. Like you assume this happened, so you ask a question in that vein. Rather, let them share at their own speed. Seemingly harmless questions can actually communicate shame. And you don't want them to walk away from this conversation having any shame or any guilt for what happened to them. They are the victim.
It's not their fault.
It's not their fault. They're innocent in this. But they already feel shame.
Yeah.
They already are guilty about what happened.
Well, let me just say this, because I know the statistics. There are people listening to this podcast episode where something happened to them. And I just want to tell you, if nobody else has told you, it's not your fault. Whatever's happened to you is not your fault. Mm-hmm. You are a victim. This is totally on the abuser. Mm-hmm. So we want to make sure that our kids who come to us, they feel that same thing as well. Like they've got the shame, they've got the guilt. Some of you know it. And so we don't want to dump that on them, because it's not on them.
It's not true.
It's not their fault.
It isn't. Okay, so what are some kind of, they seem like harmless questions, but they actually are communicating shame? What kind of questions are we talking about? Questions like, well, what were you wearing at the time?
Yeah. Like that should matter.
Yeah. And you might be curious to be like, okay, well, were you in a swimsuit and that's why this happened? Like maybe you're not trying to communicate shame with that question, but that makes it sound like it's their fault because of what they were wearing. And it's not.
Right. The implied answer is if you weren't wearing that, it wouldn't have happened. If you were wearing something else or more modest, it wouldn't have happened. And I've had this conversation before with a lady, a pastor's wife.
Mm-hmm. Older generation.
And so she was talking about how, that women have a responsibility to dress right or whatever else so that men aren't tempted. And I'm just like, no, like obviously she's responsible to God for whatever she does, right? But men are responsible to control themselves.
Amen.
To control their eyes, to control their thoughts, to control their actions. And so we're never responsible for what somebody else does. I'm responsible for what I do. You're responsible for what you do. And so a way somebody's dressed has no bearing on how somebody else is supposed to act. Mm-mm. And it doesn't make an allowance or anything else. And so you may just be thinking through your mind, well, what were you wearing at the time? What that is telling your child is, this is your fault. If you would have wore something different, it wouldn't have happened.
Which isn't true. And
it may not be what you mean even, but that's what they're going to hear.
Right. And the other thing that we want to remind you of is, remember that sexual abuse happens in every culture, in every socioeconomic status. Okay. It crosses the lines of all of that. So even in the most religious places where people are wearing skirts to their ankles and even head coverings, where they're wearing the literal scarves and like robes from their wrists covered to their ankle, there is sexual abuse happening there.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter what the woman is wearing. It happens no matter what. So just keep that in mind. What did you do? Or was it past your curfew? Were you somewhere you weren't supposed to be? These are questions that can communicate shame or guilt on their part. How long has this been going on? That makes it sound like, I'm so disappointed in you that you didn't tell me sooner.
Yeah.
They don't need any guilt. It's hard enough to talk about this. Why didn't you tell me sooner? that implies that you are disappointed with them for not talking about it. All they should be hearing is, this isn't your fault, and I'm so proud of you for coming forward. I'm so proud of you for finding the courage to talk about this, because it is hard. We are speaking from experience. It is never easy to talk about, no matter how much time has passed.
Yeah.
It is just not easy to talk about. So make sure you're not communicating any of these kinds of shame-filled questions.
And so you're having that conversation, and now you know something's happened. You've been told something's happened. So there's two things you got to do. And I said this in a pastor's group recently. Somebody put up a scenario, and I think it was an actual something happened. But it's like, what should the response be? And my response is always the same to these kind of questions. Is, first of all, you believe something happened. You believe whoever the victim is. Most people aren't making up stuff that these kind of things have happened to them. You believe, and you report the information you have to the authorities. Always. Those two things, always. So we always take an accusation seriously, and we always take steps to report that information to the authorities. Never hide it, never cover up. There are many people who reason out why it's best for the bigger picture if they don't report, which is so not true. Reporting is protecting future children from being abused. And so you, at this point, can't do anything about what's happened to you or what's happened to your children, but you can do something to protect other children. And so we have a responsibility to report that. When in doubt, report. Even suspicions are to be reported. You think something's going on, it is best to report it. And so you've got to believe them, and you've got to take steps to do something about it. Your children, now that they know, now that they've told you, they're watching to see what you're going to do and how you're going to respond. And so you've got to let them know, I 100% support you. I'm here for you. I'll do whatever it takes. And so part of that, the very first step is reporting that.
Remember, no secrets. So if a child comes to you, they may preface it with, if I tell you, will you promise not to tell anybody? You don't want to make that promise, because you don't want to have to break it, and you have to break it.
Yeah.
So make sure that if any child comes to you with, if I tell you, will you promise not to tell anybody? This is a response to that. There are some things that I cannot keep secret. I will believe what you tell me, but I can't keep certain things secret. But I do want to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, I'll keep secret what I can keep secret.
Right. So make sure that they do understand that you're not promising to keep a secret, because remember what Thomas said, never hide, never cover up. You need to share it. So don't make yourself a liar by saying you won't tell anyone.
And, if you find out your child has been sexually abused, you need to reassure them repeatedly that this is not their fault. It's got to be something they've got to hear constantly, because what's been happening in their mind over and over again is it's their fault. Whether their abusers told them or whether their mind has told them that. If I wasn't in that place, if I didn't go in that house, if I wasn't wearing that, all these things have been going through their mind that it's them somehow. And so you've got to fight that lie with the truth, and they're going to have to hear that over and over and over again. It's not your fault. And here's something that can be very helpful in the healing process for your child, and that is, apologize for your part in the lack of protection if there is one. So if you weren't where you were supposed to be, if you weren't paying attention, you have to own that. But don't make them comfort you as you talk about how bad you feel that you let it happen.
Right.
Okay, don't make it about you. They don't need to comfort you at all. Your job is to comfort them, to help them. They may regret telling you because of how you feel, and they may not share again. So we're just explaining it's the abuser's fault. No one else is guilty. If they try to apologize, and comfort you, no, you don't need to. This is the abuser's fault, and we're constantly putting the blame back where it belongs, on the abuser.
And the next step in helping your child heal from this that's happened to them is get them professional help. And you want to find someone who is skilled in this.
Exactly.
Who
yes.
knows what they're doing, how to help move them past this, because there is a certain amount of facing it. You have to relive it. You have to talk about it. You have to face and acknowledge what has happened to you in order to heal from it. And yet that's really tricky. It's really hard to do. And it needs to be done by somebody guiding them who really knows what they're doing. So make sure that you get them professional help. You can talk to your pastors. You can talk to maybe a school counselor and find out where can you send your child to get this kind of help.
Yeah, and so you want to get references from them on professionals. So as pastors and leaders of churches, we do not on an ongoing basis counsel people for sexual abuse, because that's not our area of expertise.
Right.
So in for short-term things, yes, we definitely listen, and we give them all the counsel, the support, and the encouragement we can, but we're always sending people and referring people to a counselor who this is their specialty, this is what they do, and they can help these people walk through the healing process. I will be a support for them, absolutely. So make sure it is a professional, that this is what they do. Most pastors, they're not equipped, and they haven't been trained to deal with this in a very ongoing setting. So they're great for support and counsel and all those sorts of things, but most likely your pastor knows a professional and has some referrals that they can give to you. So maybe you're the victim though. How do you heal if it's you? And this episode may have brought up a bunch of trauma for you. Or maybe you've been made aware that through these episodes of an event you buried deep in your psyche. And it's, I'm going to use the word fascinating just because I can't think of another word, but it's just fascinating the way our minds work to cope, and how that we can have things buried and not have thought about it. And then all of a sudden something brings it up. Lysandra in part 1 talked about how that going through this training brought up something she had forgotten about and had totally blocked out of her mind. But once she started hearing how these peer-to-peer abusers act, she's like, wait a minute, like that happened to me. So something may have been brought up. Now, if you realize you're the victim, here's where you have to start. You got to tell somebody. This is not a weight that you can carry on your own. You've got to tell somebody. And you say, but it's been decades. It doesn't really matter now. It doesn't matter. Yes. You may say, well, nobody will believe me. No, there are people in your life that will believe you. The true people who love you and care for you will believe you. And if you're not in a church, or you don't have a group around you that is supportive of you, that would believe you, then maybe it's time to find somewhere else that will. But you've got to tell somebody. Talking about it frees you.
So true.
And you're no longer hiding it. And I just think about, man, I held it in for so long. It took me so long to say it out loud. But once I was able to say it, then that really set me free. There's a lot of things that I still deal with on an ongoing basis because of it. But man, I tell you what, just verbalizing it to somebody, it set me free. And so I want to encourage you, you start there. Start with somebody that you trust and tell them what happened.
So a good place to start would be telling your spouse, if they don't already know. That your spouse needs to know this history for you. Even if it's something that you're just realizing happened to you because you've buried it. Make sure you tell your spouse. They need to know, because they need to be sensitive to this in your life. But you can then tell a trusted friend or a counselor and go from there. If there is opportunity for more abuse to take place, from the person who abused you, please report to the authorities immediately.
Yeah.
I know that that's hard. And the whole thing that really made us decide that we were going to do this episode now, and the timing of this episode, was because of that docuseries that is out. Let Us Pray, Prey. And I applaud these women who have come forward. I am like cheering for them. I am so proud of them, because it is so difficult to talk about this and then to talk about it publicly. Like, it's hard just to talk to your spouse about it.
Yeah.
It's hard to talk to your parents about it or whatever, but to be very, very public with it is so difficult. And so I'm so thankful that they did that, because what they're doing is they are protecting future victims, which is so great. So if your abuser has not been punished or found out, please report to authorities. It takes courage.
Yeah.
It's hard, but it is the right thing to do. So really pray about that God can help you with doing that.
And I'll say this, you have survived your abuse.
Yes.
You have survived. You are strong, and you can do this. And you have people in your life that will stand with you, that will support you, that will help you with this step. We know it's hard. We know it's difficult, but I'm telling you, you can do it, and the people in your life will be there to help you.
And we want you to hear this. Get yourself professional help. You are worth the money that professional help takes.
Yep.
You are worth the time it will take away from other things in your life, because honestly, like meeting with someone weekly to get help, you can look at that and you can see the money and you can see the time and you can say, it's not worth it. Listen, you're worth it.
Yes.
Get the help that you need, please. And then listen to this. Your abuse was not your fault. Thomas already said this, but please, we want to leave this with you as we end this episode. You didn't deserve it. You didn't bring it on yourself. It isn't your fault. The only guilty party is your abuser. So I want you to take those feelings that you have of guilt and shame and feelings of guilt. Give those feelings over to God. Allow him to take them from you and free you.
Yes.
You don't need to carry that baggage anymore.
Yeah, and so your family meeting this week is to have this conversation with your kids about sexual abuse in a way that is age appropriate for them. But we're talking and having conversation with them about what's okay and what's not okay, and what to do if something happens that's not okay, if something inappropriate happens. And so that's the conversation we're having. And
in our home, we are very open. We talk about everything. So our girls know what podcast we're recording last week and this week.
Yeah.
They know about these episodes. And sure enough, I told them, I was like, well, girls, be prepared. We're going to have a family meeting about sexual abuse. And they're all like, oh, man. And I'm like, it's coming, so be ready. Now, all of our girls are in their teen years, so we can talk candidly. But we're going to have this conversation. We're using this episode as a catalyst to have the conversation again with our children. And please take time to have that family meeting with your family too.
Yeah, definitely. It's important. It's important because we want them to be protected. So I've got to have the tough conversation. We've got to have the tough conversation as a family about what's okay, what's not okay, what to watch out for, and all those sorts of things. And not just that, it's like, okay, well, what if something's happened? All right, then we have to have that conversation about the steps to take. And remember, we've talked about it. You can go back and listen to each one of these steps and play them out in your family meeting. And that is, hey, we're just going to listen, not going to overreact. Mm-hmm. I'm going to support, I'm going to believe, I'm going to encourage, I'm going to report, I'm going to get them counseling. Those are the steps that you follow. So, but it starts by just beginning the conversation about what's appropriate, what's not appropriate, what's okay, what's not okay, and then you carry the conversation on from there.
Thank you, friends, for joining us today for these very serious episodes. Please go and subscribe to the Family Meeting Podcast from your favorite podcast provider. And if you found this information helpful, please share this episode on social media and invite your friends and family to listen in with you.
To find more content information Lysandra and I provide, you can go to our website, familymeeting.org. or email us at info@familymeeting.org. If you'd like to shoot us a text or call us, you can send a voice message at 904-257-3062.
And we want to invite you to join us for our next family meeting. We get to have a lot more of a lighthearted conversation next week, and I'm excited about that.
I'm looking forward to that. These have been very needful conversations, but I'm glad to have them behind us.
Me too.
Now, and to focus in a little bit on some lighter, happier topics.
Yes, and Christmas is coming. We're so excited. Christmas is upon us, and it's the Christmas season. And this is what we're going to talk about with our Christmas episode this year. Every year when Christmas comes along, it is just insane. It just feels insane.
Yeah.
Out and about, it feels insane. The calendar is crazy. There's so many Christmas parties and Christmas events and plays and parades and all of the different stuff. How do we keep a family focus? And in that family focus, how do we keep a focus on the real reason for the season? And if that, of course, is celebrating Jesus coming. So we're going to give you some tips and some things that we do in the Osterkamp family.
It will be here before you know it. You're going to turn around and Christmas is going to be here.
Yep.
Thanks for joining us today for this family meeting. Have a great week, everybody. This meeting is adjourned.
I feel like a weight is lifted right now.
Just having the conversation over.
That it's done.
Yeah.
Yes.
But here's the thing for you, those of you who are watching, because statistics tell me that many of you will have been victims. It's not your fault. It is not your fault.
That's right.
And we want you to know we care about you. We care about what's happening in your life. We want you to get help. We want you to be healthy. And so you need to start by telling somebody. If you've not told somebody, it's time to find somebody to tell. And then take the steps to get counseling and report if you need to. But get yourself healthy. You're worth it. Your family is worth it. And so we want to encourage you to do that. So
thanks for watching, everybody. Have a great week.